Hello, good evening, friends and community members. Really nice to see so many new faces here. My name is Amir Glogau, and I'm the founder and CEO of Guidely. And I'll take a second to introduce you, Guidely. So, Guidely is a marketplace and a community for people who are seeking to unpack and evolve into their full potential. Our tagline is never walk alone, and we mean that. So we want to make sure every one of us is supported on our journey. And it doesn't matter what chapter on the journey we are. If we are in the beginning, at the end, we took a right turn, a left turn, whatever it is. And we have guides from all over the world to support individuals on their journey. We cover 16 topics, anything from grief and trauma and career and purpose and spiritual development, etc., etc. And this session today is really designed to be a more in-depth work of after our interview with Dr. Gabor Mate about his new book, The Myth of Normal. Those of you who haven't read it yet or haven't put their hands on it, highly, highly recommended. We're going to have 2 integration sessions. Today, we have Keli here, which we will get to know here in a second, and who is incredible. And I'm so excited to learn from you, Keli. And we will have another session with Carmela next week. So welcome, everybody. And I'm excited to get this started. So, Keli, good evening.
Good evening,
Amir. So good to have you here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure and an honor. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
So before we introduce you, how do you feel tonight?
Feeling curious. I wrote to say, I'm feeling curious. Yeah.
Me too.
A little excitement, a little nervous, all of it. But it really sums up into just a real curiosity to meet this moment and everyone in the process.
Yeah. I'm humbled to be here. I feel excitement and joy and really on purpose. So instead of reading your bio and all your credentials, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What led you to be a guide? What before you became what you are and however you define yourself today? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it really all started. Well, I guess it all started at my birth, but have an interesting story in the sense that my business name is called The Other Side of Average. And really, it's actually because I'm so average. And yet how I met life was on the other side of average. And it was really because at the age of 6, my mom took me to learn transcendental meditation. And it wasn't because she was some guru, it was actually because she was really suffering. She had definitely a lot of her own wounded consciousness that she struggled with. She was in a marriage that was unhappy, that was ending. There was a lot of dysfunction, a lot of, trauma, and she knew she needed help. She was actually quite a seeker, quite a spiritual seeker. She knew that there was more, she wanted more, and yet she was really quite defined by her pain. And so
Defined by
anyways,
her
pain.
pain. Yeah.
And so she went to learn meditation as a way to support herself, to undefine, to find more inner peace and presence and, calm in this chaotic experience that she was having. And then, like many things, I just meditated because I was told to meditate. I didn't have work-related stress. I might have been asking big questions, but they weren't the ones that most people that would go to learn meditation are asking, because I was 6 years old. And then I noticed as a teenager, through all of the trauma, all of the dysfunction, the 3 different marriages, as a teenager, I had this awareness or this ability to see that the cause of my suffering wasn't what was happening around me, that it was actually what was happening inside of me. And I used to say this phrase that I remember as a teenager, and it was, I can only hear myself think for so long. And I was aware that my reliving of the situations and the circumstances was actually the cause of my suffering. It didn't mean I had the support to really integrate it. It didn't mean I understood how, but I definitely had the ability to see that my suffering was on the inside. That Gabor quote, that trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. But most people are in an experience that they are what happened to them, or they are the worst thing that they've ever done. And I was in the suffering, but I also had this ability to see from meditation. And so at 19, I went to a counselor on my own accord because, if we are aware of our suffering, we want some help to free ourselves from the suffering or the story. What do? Is we go seek guides or support. And so I went in to the office and told my story, like we all do when we go. And I was really surprised that she saw me as my story. The really traditional therapeutic approach, or, through that wounded lens, is we are the worst things we've ever done, or the worst things that have ever happened to me. So she couldn't see that I wasn't my story. And I was like, what am I doing here? This is strange. Like, I can see it. And so I went again for another appointment. And then I was like, okay, this is definitely not my path. And it was really at a young age that I sought to understand and really more embody, what does it actually mean to evolve beyond our story, to redefine the things that are defining us. And then, from there, I've worked, at 25, I went back, I got recertified in transcendental meditation. I started doing deep inner work. The mentor that I worked with, so that would have been in like 1996, I still work with today. And it actually, my mom and I ended up going through some of his programs together. To give you an idea, his 10-month program was 750 hours in 10 months. Wow. Really intensive. Wow. Very deep process work.
Right.
And so a lot of healing happened, and, the freedom from my story was realized, after my work with him. And then it was really throughout my life as, each different experience in life, how do we stay undefined, or how do we continue that process of integrating life as our teacher, meeting life and, learning from it. And I have 3 children that are just, I chose to be a conscious parent before having kids, really because I had the ability to see, I could see what this kind of parenting was like and how it impacted me. So I chose to be a conscious parent and do that work before having children. And there's not really an area in my life that I haven't brought that teaching, presence, awareness, desire to lean into. So whether it's in the birthing situations, whether it's in business, whether it's jobs or relationships, there was one time I'm a Chopra certified transcendent meditation teacher. And I remember standing on stage getting my certificate after a year of training. And so many people on the stage saying, oh, I'm meant to be a teacher. And I just couldn't relate. I am really here to be the change I wish to see, to be that living embodiment. And then from there, I'll impact as it is, or grow into whatever that means to be a teacher. But yeah.
This is beautiful. So I feel like a lot of things you say here resonate really well, and I'm soaking in this. I had the pleasure of meeting Don Miguel Ruiz a few times in my life, and in one of those late night conversations, he said that we're all authors, and we keep writing what we think at that moment is the book of our life, and then we write another chapter, or we strike that chapter and we write it again, and there is a dynamic of storytelling in our life, whether we embrace it and conscious, or whether we're not. But it's like that's the story when we introduce ourselves to others or to the audience here, when we show up, in whether with words or in any other way, we tell a story.
Yeah. And it's in listening to you say that, it reminds me of a time when I was doing the deepest levels of work as a student. I then became a mentor in his program, and it relates to the word integration, like that actually really integrating and receiving from the situations, like that truly finding freedom from them. There were stories based on my childhood that I would tell over and over and over again. They truly defined me. If I met anyone and I spoke to them for any length of time, those stories at some point were going to come to the surface. And it was really after that year and a while after, I was like, wow, sometimes you don't realize it till after, right? It was like, oh my God, I realized I don't tell these stories. Like they still happened, but we really, truly can redefine to free ourselves from the stories.
So I studied yoga for many, many years in India with a guru and the whole. And when the first time I received the mantra, I was told that, you look at it as if it's a new story you can tell yourself in one phrase, but you say it enough times that it's like burning a CD, for those of us who knows what a CD is here. And same with Louise Hay work, right? I mean, affirmations of any sort. So,
yeah.
So I wanna ask you one
and before
more
you
question.
Go any further, I just want to say I love that as a transcendent meditation teacher, and it's all about the Sanskrit mantras, and I just really love that. I might borrow that, because there's obviously, and even tonight I'll talk about what I call the 3 conscious practices. Ultimately, if we could all be raised as children, dropping into and connecting to that place of stillness and silence and the deepest levels of presence, our soul, that source of power, whatever that is, that undefined place, then yeah, our stories would be really different. Yeah. So
we just tend to, our autoplay is the chatter, right? It's so I want to ask you one more question before we dive into the session itself. What is, when you call your business on the other side of average, what is average? What does that I'm sure it emotionally it brings something up with you. What is average? Why? What's on the other side? I know you shared a little bit about what was the other side for you, but when you work with people, um,
Yeah,
tell us
I
a little
think
bit
it
about it.
has, really to do, I talk a lot about, conscious and unconscious, or, wounded consciousness. I mean, it's pretty average if you look what's happening in the world, and, for people to live through that wounded consciousness,
Mhm.
to be defined by the conditioning, the pain, the suffering. And so, for me, that other side of average was, I really was so average. I had so much pain. I had lots of different traumas and suffering. And yet the other side of average is really, for me, that ability to meet it and integrate it, to become undefined through it, to, have life be my teacher.
Mm,
That, our pain, our traumas, our shame isn't the gift, but there is always a gift
right.
on the other side. That idea, some of this is what I would share and, later on, but that life is always happening for us, not to us. It's very nice and fluffy to post on social media, but, how do we actually, meet life in that way
Well,
where we
it,
can receive from it?
it also calls for a lot of responsibility that we, in many cases in life, just don't want to have that. It's much easier to put responsibility on external or others. Um, so I want to share with you what comes to me when you say on the other side of average. It's like an average feels like a stuck, feels like a place where you bring in two, I don't know if extremes, but two sides of something to a middle point, and it doesn't move here or there. It's like stuck in that place. So it feels, what it brings to me is release. It's like you can move on the scale. You don't have to be in that middle point that doesn't create friction, or that's what I hear when you say on the other side of average.
Thank you.
Shall we start?
Sure.
I want to look at the chat. How are people feeling tonight? Are we all as excited as I am here? Yeah, excited. Yeah.
It's
Oh,
nice to see some
and
faces that I recognize.
sleepy in Atlanta. I can understand. I'm sorry we are a little late in the day here, but welcome everybody, and let's dive in.
Okay.
So
Okay.
while we are getting organized, I want to share for a second why integration is so important. And this, I've learned that, I want to say, the harder way. I was intellectually, spiritually developed for a long time. So read books, did, all sorts of things. And I kept saying some of the same patterns, repeat again and again. And this is the personal development or self-help industry, and what became industry is thriving on maintaining a certain level of pattern, because we keep consuming the same. It's the either take Prozac or whatever else, or read that next book that makes you feel good for a minute. And it's the integration process that really makes the difference of changing a pattern and changing, a dynamic. And it's just like, everything happens to me, not for me, not to me. That too may be a fluffy word, but so deeply. And we try to walk that talk here. So this is why we feel it's so important to take something like the workshop we did with Gabor and integrate and provide the tools for individuals in this session, in the next session, or working deeper with you to then create a new habits.
Mhm. Yeah, beautiful. I love that Guidely is all about integration. For sure. Okay, some housekeeping just to share a little bit. I believe Chandel is going to lock the chat at different points and open it at different points. There's a lot of information that I'm going to share, and I also want to make it as interactive as possible. The times where the chat isn't open, if you have a pen and paper down that you can write to kind of keep your questions handy so that when it opens up, you can ask. At the end, I would really like to have some open space for not only questions, but actually to work with people if there is something that someone has has an area where they're feeling a bit stuck and actually would like some help and some support in this session based on what I'm going to share with you. And at any time that I use words that don't really resonate for you, there's lots of words that you can exchange and input, right from, really quite spiritual or maybe even woo-woo words to psychology. There's lots of different words in there that can be inserted. At times where I might open it up to the group, I am going to go by the Zoom electronic hand. So if you want to find out where that is, usually it's in the reactions, depending on what device you're in or using. And yeah, I think that is about it. So we went over the introduction. I'm going to really explain the session is about the TASA method. And TASA is just that acronym for the other side of average. And I know in Gabor's talk, when Amir asked, what is this bigger purpose? If you were to kind of zoom back, and what would you say would be the bigger purpose of the book or even the work that he does? And he said, a map to understand suffering. And I developed the TASA method about 5 years ago. And actually I've called it, the cause of suffering and the answers to it. And it's a bit more visual in nature. It's so simple. There'll be some circles and some stick figures on the screen. But I'm hoping that there's not a process, a stuckness, a suffering, or an expansiveness that I can't relate to these diagrams in some way. So I'm hoping that they are just going to be another map or a diagram that you can use. And we'll talk about the qualities needed to develop that deep integration experience, how to unlock the 5 parts of stuckness, triggers, so that, we can receive the gift on the other side of it. And then, as I mentioned, we'll do some group work at the end or some individual work, and there'll be time for questions all the way along. And I would love, because this was really on the heels of having Gabor here, and Daniel, and about the myth of normal. And I would actually just love to hear some of your takeaways for those that attended, or a quote that you want to pop in the chat box. And on the chat box in Zoom, there's 3 little dots at the bottom. And if you click it, you can actually save the chat. So there might be a lot of really great quotes or takeaways that you want to save the chat and look at that later. So we talked a little bit about my story. I mentioned I'm a Chopra certified transcendent meditation teacher. I'm a certified forgiveness coach, a conscious uncoupling coach, conscious parenting, conscious relationship coach, and just finishing my training in compassionate inquiry, which is really just so parallel to everything that I do anyway. And I also am a breathwork facilitator and trainer. And as I've already shared with Amir and everyone through his questioning, is really I just help people redefine what's been defining them and to release their stuckness. And these are my children here. I have a 22-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 17-year-old. And all of my children do all of this work. They all meditate. Most of the time, if I'm leading breathwork workshops, I have all three of them in there at the same time. My daughter and I just finished writing, being part of a compilation book and writing a book together. I really have lived these teachings and seen the impact. I know that I was here to break the cycle, to break the chains of that trauma, that dysfunction, and see the impact in my three children specifically. Everything that I do is really ultimately for the kids. So the TASA method is really my life's work. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodologies. It's a 5-layer approach to really meeting our conscious evolution and conscious healing journey. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call the 3 aspects of self, who we are really, and as mentioned already, the cause of suffering and the answers to it, and why we do what we do. All mental, emotional behavior patterns are really in service to a need, a true unmet need. And when we meet that, the patterns tend to fall away. And I just really wanted to request, I guess, that the diagrams, the methodologies, steps, the stages that I outline are not used without my written permission, that the underlying truth and concepts are obviously not mine to take ownership of, but there's a book that I'm writing in reference to all of this. And so just wanted to name that. So the 3 aspects of self, who we are really, and some of these, really you might already have quite a deep understanding of, and be able to relate to the things I'm talking about. For some of you, it might be quite new. The one thing that is for certain is that depending on where we are on our journey, on our awareness, on our knowledge, is that we're all here because we have a desire to step into more of who we are in some capacity or another. So my hope is that they support you with this. These 3 aspects of self, most of you have probably heard mind, body, soul. So we have our subtle body, or our psychological body, and it's comprised of our mind, our intellect, and our ego. So the mind is more of our emotional, feeling, thinking aspect. The intellect is where we process information, where we make decisions. The ego is our attachments, our identity, our positions, our possessions, and it's really rooted in the physical. The physical body is comprised of our environment, our literal skin and bones, our physical body, and our energy body. And we don't have to know a lot about chakras or energy, because every single one of us has the experience of walking into a room and being able to cut the air with a knife. So we understand that energy has an impact in some capacity. And then our causal body, which is our spiritual body, is our personal soul, our collective soul, and the universal soul. And I'm not really going to go into that too much. Really, it's just a lead in to the rest of it, or a diagram of this stick figure that is really making up us as human beings. And the TASA method is this 5-layer approach, as I mentioned, or process into our conscious evolution and conscious healing journey, so that we can live our, life is going to happen either way, and we can meet it consciously, or we're going to meet it unconsciously through that wounded lens. And these layers, or these steps, are really about how do we fully integrate these fragmented parts, or these parts that are defined by parts of our story? How do we actually break the cycle and remember the wholeness, that innateness of who we really are, so that our kids, so that future generations don't inherit the unconscious patterns, and so that we can all meet life and life's challenges in a way where we can, it's like that pathless path where we can really just meet life and integrate it. So I'm going to go into these a little bit more, but the first is an inner calling. Number 2 is conscious support. 3 is conscious learning. 4 is conscious practice. And 5 is conscious surrender. So an inner calling, or, it could be just this like deep desire from, in your soul that there's more to life, this yearning, or maybe it's been a wake-up call. It could be a loss, an illness, a divorce, an accident. And at this stage, typically we have an awareness that more is available or needed, that what is happening currently isn't sustainable, even if it's wrapped in a lot of gratitude. Somebody actually reached out yesterday for one of the mini compassionate inquiry sessions that I know, is going to be in the chat box at different points that are available for you. And, she came, and really her big question was, is it okay to feel? I have this, idea that more is possible, that there's more grace, there's more ease, and yet I feel stuck. And yet I look around and I know I didn't have it that bad. So really, is it okay for me to feel these feelings? And so it was this desire that was just really bubbling up in her, knowing more was possible and feeling like she needed to have one or the other, but we can have both. And we can feel a lot of gratitude and joyousness in our life, and yet know that more is possible and available for us. So out of curiosity, if you feel like sharing, I would love to hear what your wake up call has been, maybe at different points in your life, or maybe where you're noticing that deep inner call. What does that feel like? What does that look like? Where do you feel called to step into more of life? And I, at this point too, if someone, obviously the chat box is there, but if someone wants to share, we could probably open it up to like 3 people if you want to use your electronic hand and share. In red.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Magnificent. I'll be brief. I'm incredibly grateful to be here tonight with y'all. Even though I missed the session yesterday, we were beyond capacity. So I didn't get to join in. I'll be taking the recording later. I've been following the work of Dr. Mate for some time. Took part in the 60-hour content through SAND, Science and Non-Duality. What a mind-blowing course. And I have felt a deep resonance with this movement and this work, and just that this community exists and is pursuing healing on an individual and a communal and a worldwide level. I mean, that is so heartening, and it keeps us going. So just wanted to throw that out there. I don't know what capacity I'll be called to take part in it, but my heart is there for it. So that's all
Right.
I've got.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful. His work definitely elicits a call forward. So, and thank you for everyone who has been sharing in the chat box the death of your child. And I just really want to acknowledge that, Nancy. Being diagnosed cancer. Yeah. My wake-up call was when I came very ill with an autoimmune disease. The son became angry with me and he didn't want to live with me. Heartbreak, grief, depression when you were 19. Yeah, becoming pregnant. And the weight of motherhood, chronic physical pain. Mother's death. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for sharing what your wake-up call was, or what really woke something up in you that more was possible, or the call to relieve some of your suffering. So thank you for sharing. And so the second stage or layer is conscious support. That's sort of having a guide, a mentor, or support. Because if we could have implemented change on our own, then simply reading the books would have been enough. As Amir had mentioned, the intellectual, aspects to what it means to have some understanding. When we know that if change is going to happen, we need the right kind of support. And I use conscious support very consciously because of my experience of the first counselor that I had, or different times or different experiences that I've had with clients that really are lacking support, and the impact that it has is actually a really important and very, very integral piece of our healing journey. That so much of where we got wounded was in a relational container. So the healing happens in a relational container as well, or can happen, again, with the right kind of support. And the next stage is conscious learning. So we might learn about particular tools, particular methodologies that are in support. Reading the book, the different learning is really important, but ultimately the learning is when we have that kind of conscious support to bring the unconscious conscious. That's the deepest levels of learning. We don't know what we don't know. And all we really need to know is that there's more. And what is happening right here is what our unconscious wants. And, oftentimes I put the iceberg in here for a reason, because, many of you might have heard that analogy or seen that analogy at different times of the mind to an iceberg, where 10% is conscious and 90% is unconscious. And then most people are like, okay, well, I guess just 90% of my mind is unconscious, as if somehow that needed to be the way. But actually, that's part of what the integration process is. It's part of bringing the unconscious conscious, is that when we have the right support and processes to really meet those places and integrate them, the ratio starts to shift. We become conscious choice makers instead of unconsciously moving through the world. And the next is conscious practice. And I really break it down into the 3 conscious practices. Again, just when we look at mind, body, and soul, we really do, for a long time I said, well, if I was only going to pick one, it would be meditation, because if we could just transcend and connect to the part of us that is bigger than all of the experiences, we would just flow in life. I mean, I think it was the Dalai Lama says, if we taught every 7-year-old to meditate, we would end world suffering within 7 generations. And it really is true. because as you'll see with another diagram that I have coming up, that part of us is whole and complete and is undefined. And yet I would find that I would work with people through meditation, and they, they wouldn't implement the practice of becoming undefined. Because if you go back to that stick figure, we've got the mind, the body, the soul. And if most of us are pretty trapped in the mind, in order to access the part of us that is bigger than all of it, we have to get in our bodies. And for most of us, we're carrying a lot of pain. So to access that, it's really, it can be painful. When we sit in stillness, we start seeing what is instead of maybe what we want to see. And so I really, instead of looking at it as just that conscious practice being about connecting on that deepest of levels, we really need all three. That ability to be compassionately curious, the ability to meet ourselves in our body, to be with and process the emotions that are there, and also access stillness and develop presence. So it's really that magical combination. And oftentimes I'll talk about embodiment, the embodiment piece as embodied feeling, that we all have to learn how to feel again. Because how many of us have stuffed our emotions based on the world around us wasn't safe to feel, or other people's emotions weren't safe. So it's been a place that we all have to learn how, we all have to learn how to feel again. And then the last is conscious surrender. And that's really, this stage is about when we really integrate these pieces and meet these pieces and redefine these, these parts, is our faith deepens, whatever that is. It's not religious in context. Whatever your religion is or whatever your faith is, it deepens. And with that comes a deeper trust in life, in ourselves. And there's a grace and a flow and ease and a renewed sense of safety in the world. And I could go into that in so many other ways, but, and really then the cycle repeats, because once we've integrated, that part or that piece or that wound, and we step forward in our life in new ways, there might be another yearning or calling that comes to the surface. And this one is really that diagram that I talk about as far as the cause of suffering and the answers to it. And I'm going to zoom it in because I know it's pretty small on the screen. So it's really, how do we end up in these experiences of suffering? And how do we break the cycle of it? And if we looked at trauma, see if I can get this to zoom. Yeah, there we go. We looked at trauma in its most rudimentary definition. It's an event that happened that we haven't been able to integrate. Or Gabor's quote, as I mentioned, trauma isn't what happens to us, it's what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. So this diagram, really shows us as an infant, connected, innocent. And I use the word human being. And it was really from years ago, I listened to Eckhart Tolle talk about when he first came to learning English, and he looked at the word human being, and he was talking about how confused he was about the structure of the word. And then actually coming to a realization of how brilliant it was that, here we are, we have this beingness or the spiritual aspect of who we are, and yet we're in this human form living in this world of humanity. And so we come into this world connected, to our wholeness. I mean, and through life, we create, through these experiences of trauma, of suffering in some capacity, these unintegrated parts start creating a separation or a fragment between our beingness and our humanness. If we broke down suffering is nothing more than a disconnect from who we really are. We're living in an illusion of separation. and in its avoidance of pain and vulnerability. And if we looked at beingness, right, so I can zoom it in a bit more. Beingness is other words that you can use: our soul, our true self, it's pure consciousness, it's non-physical reality, and it lives by eternal truths. The world of humanity, or humanness, is our ego mind, the human condition. It's the physical reality in which we live, and it's the world of humanity. And one of the things there is the rules are always changing. So these two parts are in conflict because this part naturally wants to love and join and heal and integrate. And this part is defined and usually wants to judge or blame, condemn. And so they're in conflict, these two parts. There's many kind of foundational principles in which all my work rests. And one is we have to actually meet our duality before we can experience non-duality. That equal loving embrace and meeting of all of it so that we can really truly meet our wholeness. And if you think about this part as children, when we come in that are connected to our beingness, is kids naturally want to love and forgive and let go. We're born to love, and we learn, there's that quote, and we learn to fear or to hate. And life is a journey through time and space, and yet it's also this spiritual journey that transcends both time and space. And whether our parents had good intentions, even if we dove even deeper into the trauma conversation, which I'm not going today, but when we look at generational trauma, developmental trauma, all aspects of trauma, event trauma, they really disconnect us from ourselves. Again, that restriction on the inside. And even with our parents having good intentions, we've all been exposed to trauma in some capacity. One of Gabor's quotes, one time I was listening to him talk, and he says, "What is human nature?" And when we really take that deep dive into whether our needs are met or unmet, we find our behavior. And anything that is wrong with us began as a survival mechanism in childhood and stems from these, fractures or fragments. And so really the beautiful thing is that this wholeness is always here. To the degree of our disconnect from ourselves, to the degree of our suffering, the victim narrative or wounded consciousness, or even, labels or personality disorders. And so when we learn to redefine what's defining us and reconnect to the part of us that is bigger than all of it, we come back into wholeness. Remember who we really are. But we need those 5 steps that I showed you. And all of us as children create a belief in our deficiency through those events in order to make sense of our pain, of the challenges of the situations within our environment. And we're left believing and living through the lens of we aren't enough, or that something's wrong with us because we took on that meaning. And as Amir and I were talking, and Gabor uses the word agency, it really does require that radical responsibility to see our role in our suffering, like I saw as a teenager. That the events happened, and it doesn't mean, when I talk about living in, embracing the duality, it doesn't mean that we don't actually take someone to court or make amends for what went wrong in the world of humanity. But if we stay there, we'll always be a victim. That victim narrative is there. So we do need to embrace the other part, but we can't negate or bypass either one. So that, seeing our role in our suffering, awakening is simply implementing these 5 steps so that we can develop our awareness or our ability to see. I know Gabor said in the event that, he was talking about, I think it was the 5 A's or maybe it was the 4 A's, and there was the 5th one that he mentioned was missing. And he said that without awareness, we can't even approach the rest. So that ability to see what is instead of what we want to see, really developing that awareness outside of our cognitive awareness so we can meet it and integrate it. I often talk about life being our litmus test. Again, Amir mentioned that piece about having a lot of cognitive awareness, and yet life still wasn't matching what he knew. And, if we want to know what we learned when we were 1, all we have to do is look around because we're living it. Life is our litmus test. If we want to peek into that 90% that's unconscious underneath the surface, it's kind of a hard truth, but we actually get exactly what our unconscious self wants. That's what we're creating, is exactly what our unconscious self wants. And, pain, trauma, they're universal. Sometimes I use the quote, trauma changes us, that's for certain, but how it changes us is a choice. Yeah. So, the work that I do is really about, that whole body experience. Therapeutic approach, the embodied approach, and the karmic approach to healing through all of those 5 steps, that holistic approach, the bottom-up approach. And, Gabor talks often about, how he got there was more from the top down. If we've learned to disconnect at the deepest of levels, and we aren't really connected to our felt sense or our bodies, and our awareness might first come through the cognitive understanding. And then, we're coming back into wholeness in this direction. For me, my mom gave me meditation at a young age. So I was connected to my intuition, my felt sense, my knowingness, but I lived in a world, that world of humanity where it's not okay to just know something, but not know why you know it. So the world tells us that we should have all of the details. We've given so much emphasis to the mind. So it's really this whole body approach to healing that I feel is about that full integration. Our mind, and Gabor spoke about this a little bit during his event, and I hear him speak about it a lot through the training with him, that our mind just learns things. It only sees what's just right in front of us. And we're meaning-making machines. So oftentimes, we then attach assumptions and meanings to it. And working with the mind in a more therapeutic way is we can create new meaning, new understanding. And on the embodied approach, our body feels things. And when we start coming into our body and we feel things, but we can't explain things. And oftentimes our mind pops up and says, okay, well, because I feel this way, it must mean X, Y, Z, and we attach a meaning to it. But again, being, dropping in even further and connecting on that more karmic approach, and we get to connect to the part of us that knows, the intuition. Our heart and soul is the only parts of us that can make sense of the things that our mind can't. And yeah, before we get into the actual process part of what we're going to do tonight, I would love to hear who you would be without your suffering. You can maybe even just take a couple of breaths. It could be just some chronic pain that you have. It could be, bigger experiences of suffering that you're experiencing in your life. But maybe just leaning into the inquiry. And Chandel said that she just opened up the chat. And I'll actually put these in here. Who would you be without your suffering? How would you show up in the world? What would you be experiencing? You'd be experiencing more peace. Universal love. You'd feel lighter. Yeah. I would be a person who can handle life's experiences without breaking down. I would be me, free. Yeah. Formless. You'd sleep better. Would be more present for others. Yeah. A lot less guilt, healthier. And if anyone, wants to raise their hand and speak, we could probably have a couple shares. Happy gut, optimistic, trying to catch them all, but would be filled with vibrance. Yeah, would sleep well, would be feeling peace. Beautiful. So, and sometimes I hear people say, I don't know who I am on the other side of suffering. And that can be quite, for some people, it can be scary and also quite exciting. But we have to meet the unknown in that place. And we're so used to, attaching to the known. Expansive. Great. Wouldn't try to people please. Yeah. How would we show up in the world if we weren't suffering? All right. Well, thank you everyone for your shares. I want to talk a little bit about the process of integration so that we can actually get into the practice of it. And I've really mentioned it in many different ways through story and just through some of, the steps or methodologies or processes there. But integration is becoming undefined. It's really about freeing ourselves from our story. Someone once said to me, God, when am I ever going to be free from these difficult emotions or this stress or this chaos? And, one thing to remember is that we're always going to have all emotions. Life is still going to happen. But how we meet life is what gets to change when we integrate and free ourselves on the inside. We meet life in a responsive way. And, Gabor talked about this quite a bit the other night, and especially when he spoke about anger. A lot of people, have this concept of anger. And I always say, we can use our anger or it can use us. Again, if we looked at emotions, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but it's energy in motion. Something wants to be met. And when we can integrate these places, even if we've had unhealthy anger in the past, then we get to just feel that anger from a more passionate, holistic, embodied place that can support us in making, creating boundaries. Like he said, there's a story of, I think it was the autobiography of a yogi, and there was these disciples on the train, and the teacher got up to go use the washroom, and there was assigned seating in this particular box, and some people came and sat in his seat, and the disciples are all like, "Oh, I wonder what's gonna happen when he comes back, and see how this master is going to approach this situation." And he came out and he asked the gentleman to leave, and he wouldn't, and so he got angry. And, the disciples were like, "Oh my gosh, he actually got angry." We're not going to be free from them, but how we meet our emotions, how we embody them, how we own them changes. And before I get into the 5 parts of the process, I want to talk just really quickly about a trigger. And a trigger is a little tiny mechanism on a loaded weapon. And you may have heard this analogy, and I always love listening to it many times. It's a great reminder. But, everyone's focused on the trigger. And what is a trigger without the explosive material in the weapon? It just goes click, click, and doesn't create any damage. So that explosive material that's inside of the weapon is like our unconscious material inside of us. We're so focused on the trigger being something out here, but what is it triggering? It's triggering the unconscious material on the inside. And when there's these 3 circles for a reason. When we are triggered by something in our environment, we're actually dealing with 3 things in that moment. It's what's actually being asked of us in this current situation. So that's the now. What is triggering from our past, some past wounds, and the highest calling. If everything that's happening is happening for us, this is a divine opportunity to remember our wholeness and to heal, then it's what's really being called for to be integrated in this moment. And so we're really dealing with all 3 aspects. And the larger the trigger, the more reactive or explosive we are, it means the more unconscious material. So the larger the reaction, it's actually more about the past than it is about the current situation. Otherwise, we would just state what we need, and actually respond to the situation. Okay, this last little piece, and then we can open it up for deeper inquiry and questions and processes. So when we're in that trigger, when we're feeling overwhelmed, when we're feeling stuck, when we're experiencing that suffering quite acutely in the moment, it seems like one big ball of mess. Anyone agree? Who here has had experiences of being consumed by that experience or that stress or that overwhelm or that stuckness? Yeah. Yes. But actually there's 5 parts to it. So when we learn how to unravel those 5 parts, we can free ourselves from it. We can start integrating it. And the first part, the first one is where it is in the body. So our body actually notices things before we do. And, we need to start listening through those, that 5-layer approach. We start implementing those practices, receive the support, meeting ourselves, coming into our body. We can actually start listening to the early warning signs before our body needs to shout to get our attention, or before we're so far into the reaction that we aren't even aware of what's going on in our body. Number 2 is the emotions itself. So all emotions have a purpose. Every single one of them is there to be validated, acknowledged, met, leaned into, emotion, energy in motion. And yeah, usually there is some more reactive ones that are compensations for deeper, truer ones. But when we really have the ability and the tools and the support to meet emotions, they actually take about 90 seconds to move through. So why do we spend years holding on to those emotions? Because of number 3, which is the narrative. the story, the belief, the meaning that we're making of the emotion or the situation, which is also tied to those, those unconscious wounds, the beliefs, the narratives that are driving, it's the narratives that are driving the suffering. And it is all there, covering up or in service to a true unmet need from our past, which is number 4. And this is where, we get to step into that, radical responsibility to meet our needs, to reparent our inner children. We've all had difficult situations, deep trauma, loss in some capacity, or maybe even still struggling quite, severely. But when we really unravel these and, start meeting this unmet need from our past, these places where we got lost, then not only do we feel filled up on the inside, but we actually take people off the hook, because how do those unmet needs that are, stuck in our body, not being met, not being expressed, the emotions not being felt, how does that usually come out? In behavioral patterns that don't really serve us or those that we love, or maybe even struggle to love. Needy, passive aggressive, manipulative. So when we can really meet those needs that were unmet at some point, we take other people off the hook. But actually then what happens when we start feeling filled up on the inside and we're taking other people off the hook, amazingly, they can actually start, there's people that might not be meeting your needs that you're like, wow, they just start showing up in ways you had no idea was possible from that integration. And number 5 is receive. That's the integration piece, that the pain isn't the gift, but there is always a gift in the center of the pain. If we're willing to take the time to do this work, we get to reclaim our innocence, we step into our authenticity, we feel a real sense of inner confidence, we love ourselves more, there's more joy and peace and abundance and all of those things that, that everyone, shared of who would you be without your suffering. We get to be that. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I want to open it up for questions, even, or Amir, if you want to step in, but some questions. And then I would love to just either work with some people really specifically through that 5-step process, or do a group or do a group process around that.
So first of all, thank you so much, Keli. This was so profound and comprehensive. I love the different pieces of it. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Susan David, who wrote the Emotional Agility.
I haven't.
She's a beautiful book.
Nice.
And she's introducing a process to look for the underlying need. Actually talked about it with Gabor the other day, and fundamentally what you're describing, you're really breaking it down to, it's almost like an operating system, right? How do we find it? So
and yet we still have to bring such deep presence to it, because it does, we can't possibly, integration and healing doesn't happen with understanding alone.
Right.
When we're working with those 5 parts, remembering that if we don't get to all of them, that really that first step is there for a reason. Depending on the amount of trauma and stuckness in the body, we might stay at that just somatically, what is going on in the physical body for a while. We might be in tune with some of the emotions that are underneath it, But the first thing, and that opens all of the rest of it, is to be with the body, to really bring that level of presence and breath and awareness into what's going on in the physical body. With that trigger, with that stuckness, with that suffering. And Amir, did you want?
I feel like I want to say thank you for Alicia and Manjit for
Yes.
showing up and being vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
and being courageous, not just by showing up here on stage, if you will, but showing up for themselves and feeling. Sometimes allowing ourselves to feel whatever is, which is in it by itself is an integration phase,
Absolutely.
is so courageous because we are programmed as I read in my new go-to. It's the process that creates depression, and this is how we're programmed.
Yeah.
So when we want to open it up, it's hard.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you, Kelly, for holding this beautiful, safe space for both of them and for all of us.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, it really is part of it's why it's one of those 3 conscious practices. So we all have to learn how to feel again.
So
Yeah.
I did a workshop many years ago with a teacher in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I told him that I cannot feel this, whatever it is. And he said the only thing that emotion that is buried there wants is to be seen and heard.
Yeah. 100%.
And once that emotion, whatever that is seen and heard, so I know it's kind of I don't want to say a heavy ending, but it's a little bit of we all feel a little emotional when we all absorbed a little bit of the pain. But I also invite everybody to also integrate a little bit of release with it.
Mm-hmm.
That emotion
Absolutely.
has been seen.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit of light. They say that the wound is the crack through which light enters, right?
Absolutely. And there's no amount of pain that I've ever experienced in any session with anyone, no matter where, the different stories or the different ways in which they've met it, that hasn't led to a lightness. And even, both of the ladies said, when we brought it back to the body, I feel a little bit lighter.
Mm-hmm.
That it really truly is, the wound is where the light enters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we were all together, I would either suggest we hold hands or hug and hold each other in this. And I want to say really huge thank you, Kelly,
Thank you.
for showing up and for being with us since the beginning of Guidely. And for showing up tonight. I want to say thank you to everybody here. Hello at Guidely. If you need anything, I think Kelly dropped all of her information. Feel free to reach out, and really encourage you to work with a guide, even if you already work with a therapist. I personally worked with a therapist and with a guide for many years, just because I feel that therapy happens on one level and there are so many other levels that traditional therapy doesn't necessarily address. So this is me also doing my, that's what's right for me. So I encourage you all to do that.
I really
and,
want to. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. You go. I was going to ask you.
I was just going to thank you for doing what you do and having that intention, that holding that space as Godly's one of their foundational principles is integration.
Yeah.
The actual ability to free ourselves, and just really want to acknowledge that, and for having Gabor and pulling it together with so many registrants and all of the moving parts that it takes.
Yeah, the second time we had a wonderful conversation before and right after when he was with us in March, and was really wonderful to have him for the second time, and already texting about the third time. So excited about this relationship and many others. So just for everybody, so you know, our next integration session is next week. I don't remember the exact date.
I think it's Wednesday. Is
Wednesday.
That right, Shandell?
It's on Monday at 5 Pacific time.
Monday, 5 Pacific time. Join us. It's going to be incredible. Different, very different palette, the very different method to integrate based on compassion cultivation training. And we have on October 21st our next event in Guidely with Anil Chadwani and Komela, who are presenting love and meditation, 2 doors to resilience. So those of us who wants to explore some resilience using those 2 tools, I invite you. Really, both of them are incredible guides. And we have Gabby Bernstein as our next keynote on November 15, I think. And we just confirmed our next keynote for December. That's going to be Kyle Cease on December 8th. I don't know if you know Kyle, but it's going to be entertaining and funny. He is a former stand-up comedian who turned into a spiritual teacher. We'll have some fun. And then we are scheduled to have Dr. Shefali Tzabar in January. So lots of good stuff coming up. Hopefully in between, we'll all find the right guides for us and and integrate all the different parts that are underwater, above the water, that, the emotions that we want to feel and we don't want to feel. And, so we have a tradition. Those of you who are new to Guidely, unmute, let's unpin and whatever, and let's say a big good night with a lot of loving and joyful energy to each and every one of you. That's it. So thank you, everybody.